The artificial sun of Crescent Harbor was programmed to set at exactly 1900 hours. It was not a true sunset, of course. There was no horizon here, only the curved, tessellated panels of the Stargarden Dome, mimicking the atmospheric scattering of a planet that most refugees on the station had never walked upon. The light shifted from a sterile clinical white to a bruised purple, then to a synthetic apricot that washed over the metal walkways and the weary faces of the commuters. Rowan Hale sat on a bench made of cold, recycled alloy. It was bolted to the floor near the edge of the observation deck, a spot that offered a view of the sprawling, chaotic geometry of the Vixen tier below and the vast, star-dusted void beyond the transparisteel glass above. He was nearly 40 years old, though the war had etched lines around his eyes that belonged to a man twice his age. He wore the gray, grease-stained jumpsuit of a station maintenance technician, a uniform that rendered him invisible to the passing crowds. He held a cup of recycled caf in his hands, seeking warmth rather than flavor. The liquid was bitter and tasted faintly of ozone, but it was hot. That was enough. Rowan had just finished a 10-hour shift repairing the atmospheric scrubbers in Sector 4. His knuckles were skinned, and his back ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm that matched the hum of the station's gravity generators. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the simulated wind generated by the massive climate fans concealed within the artificial trees brush against his face. It smelled of ozone lubricant and the faint, spicy scent of Vasari cooking drifting up from the lower levels. He was tired. It was a bone-deep exhaustion that sleep rarely cured. It was the exhaustion of a man who had spent 15 years trying to outrun his own shadow, only to find it waiting for him every time he stopped moving. To his left, a holographic directory flickered. It was a small malfunction, a microsecond delay in the photon emitter that caused the image of the station map to stutter. Most people walked past it without noticing. The business-class travelers from the core worlds, the haggard dock workers, the medical drones gliding on silent, anti-grav repulsion fields, none of them saw it. Rowan saw it. It was an itch in the center of his brain. He tried to ignore it. He took a sip of his coffee. He looked at the artificial trees, their leaves made of green silk and fiber optics rustling in the programmed breeze. He looked at the stars. The flicker persisted. Snap. Buzz. Snap. With a sigh that was more air than sound, Rowan set his cup down on the bench. He reached into the deep pocket of his cargo trousers and pulled out a multi-tool. It was an old model, heavy and scarred much like its owner. He stood up, his knees popping, and approached the directory. He did not want to fix the world. He had tried that once nearly 2 decades ago with a pen and a signature on the Crescent Treaty, and he had failed so catastrophically that the guilt still tasted like ash in his mouth. He could not fix the displacement of millions. He could not fix the ember fever that was slowly consuming the Vasari population. He could not fix the prejudice that festered in the cramped corridors of this station. But he could fix a flickering light. Rowan pried the maintenance panel open with a practiced flick of his wrist. He bypassed the faulty regulator, rerouted the power flow through the auxiliary circuit, and tightened the coupling. The stutter vanished. The map of Crescent Harbor stabilized, glowing with a crisp, steady blue light. He snapped the panel shut and pocketed his tool. A small, grim smile touched his lips. It was a tiny victory. A meaningless victory. But it was ordered restored to a chaotic universe, if only for a square foot of electronics. He sat back down, picking up his cooling coffee. The foot traffic in the Stargarden Dome was thinning as the dinner hour approached, but the diversity of the crowd remained. Humans in sharp, tailored flight suits walked briskly, checking their data pads. Heavy worlders with thick gray skin lumbered toward the transport tubes. And then there was the Vasari. Rowan watched them from the periphery of his vision, careful never to make direct eye contact. They were easy to spot. The Vasari were fox-like humanoids, graceful and lithe. They had large, triangular ears that twitched at every sound, and magnificent tails that swished behind them, for balance and communication. Their fur ranged from deep russet to snowy white, though on this station many looked dull and matted, a sign of poor nutrition and the stress of confinement. A group of 3 Vasari passed by the bench. They wore scavenged clothing, human jackets that were too broad in the shoulders, scarves knitted from unraveled shipping blankets. They carried the scent of K-leaf smoke and antiseptic. Despite their ragged appearance, they walked with a quiet dignity, their amber eyes scanning the crowd with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Rowan turned his head away, feigning interest in the bottom of his coffee cup. "Don't look," he told himself. The mantra was a reflex now. "Don't engage. You are just a mechanic. You are Rowan the Fix-It Man. You are not the officer who signed the evacuation order. You are not the reason they are squeezed into the Vixen tier like cargo." He felt the familiar claw of guilt in his chest. It was a physical weight, heavier than the gravity of the moon they orbited. During the war, he had been a logistics officer. He had been young, idealistic, and foolish enough to believe that logistics could save lives. He had overfilled the transport ships. He had calculated that the life support systems could handle 120% capacity. He had been wrong about the radiation shielding. The ships had arrived, yes, but the passengers had been changed. The ember fever was the legacy of his arithmetic. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to banish the memory of the medical bays, the glowing fur, the heat radiating from feverish bodies. "Mommy Fox misses you, veteran. She smiles through her fever." The voice was small. It was high-pitched, melodic, and cut through the ambient hum of the station like a silver bell. Rowan flinched. His eyes snapped open. He had expected to see a ghost. In a way, he did. Standing directly in front of him, blocking his view of the artificial sunset, was a child. She was a Vasari kit, perhaps 6 years old by standard reckoning. She was tiny, a bundle of nervous energy, wrapped in a patchwork tunic made from a repurposed blue flight suit that was 5 sizes too big for her. It was belted at the waist with a length of yellow electrical cord. Her ears were large and tipped with black, one of them flopped over slightly at the apex. Her tail was bushy, twitching back and forth with a rhythmic swish-swish against her ankles. But it was her eyes that pinned Rowan to the cold metal of the bench. They were large and luminous, holding the chaotic intelligence of a creature that has seen too much too soon. One eye was the standard molten amber of her species, but the other was a startling crystalline blue, a human blue. Rowan stared at her. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He gripped his coffee cup so hard, the cardboard sleeve crumpled. "I beg your pardon," Rowan said, his voice raspy from hours of silence. The little girl did not back down. She stood with her feet planted firmly apart, clutching a sheaf of crumpled papers to her chest. She looked at him with absolute terrifying certainty. "I said Mommy Fox misses you," she repeated, articulating every syllable with careful precision. "She smiles through her fever. That is what she does. But she misses the veteran." Rowan blinked. He looked around, checking to see if she was speaking to someone behind him. The walkway was empty, save for a cleaning droid, whirring softly near a trash receptacle. "You have the wrong person, little one," Rowan said, his tone gentle but firm. He set his cup down, preparing to stand up and walk away. This was dangerous. This was exactly the kind of interaction he had spent 5 years avoiding. "I don't know your mother. I'm just a mechanic." The girl tilted her head to the side. Her flopped ear perked up, then settled back down. She scrutinized him, her mismatched eyes, scanning his face, his hands, his boots. "You have sad eyes," she observed. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the blunt honesty that only children and the very old possess. "And you fix things. Ooh. I saw you fix the light. Mommy says veterans are the ones who tried to fix the world but broke themselves instead." Rowan felt a lump form in his throat. He cleared it harshly. "Your mother sounds like a philosopher, but she is mistaken about me." I was in the service, yes, a long time ago, but I didn't know her. She knows you, the girl insisted. She shifted the papers in her arms, freeing one hand to point a small, clawed finger at his chest. She talks about the quiet officer, the one who made the ships wait, the one who signed the paper. Rowan went cold. The blood drained from his face, leaving him feeling lightheaded. The quiet officer. It was a nickname from a lifetime ago whispered in the refugee camps on the rim. How could this child know that? Listen, Rowan said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He leaned forward, urgency sharpening his features. You shouldn't say things like that. It's not safe to talk about the war here. Who is your mother? The girl smiled then. It was a brilliant, sharp-toothed grin that transformed her face from solemn to mischievous. I am Luma, she announced, ignoring his question about safety. Luma Nix. My mother is Sarah, and she needs soup. Soup, Rowan repeated, caught off guard by the sudden shift in topic. Yes, soup. Luma shuffled her papers and pulled one out. It was not a pristine sheet of stationery. It was the back of a thermal receipt, wrinkled and gray, likely scavenged from a waste bin. On the blank side, someone had drawn a picture with colorful wax crayons. She thrust the paper into Rowan's hand. He looked down at it. The drawing was crude, chaotic, and brimming with life. It depicted a round table. On one side sat a large orange figure with giant ears, the mother. On the other side sat a stick figure in gray with a sad face but very large hands. In the middle was a smaller orange figure. In the center of the table was a giant bowl emitting squiggly lines of steam. Underneath the drawing, written in an erratic, childish script that mixed capital and lowercase letters, were the words, "Soup for the sad man. Come eat." It is an invitation, Luma explained, puffing out her chest proudly. I made it. Mommy is sick again. The ember fever makes her glow, and she gets cold even when she is hot. When she is sick, she does not eat, but she likes to watch people eat. She says it makes her feel full. Rowan stared at the drawing. The stick figure in gray was undeniably him. The sad face was a simple curved line, yet it captured his mood with devastating accuracy. Luma, Rowan said, feeling a crack forming in the wall he had built around himself. I cannot come to your home. I am a stranger. You shouldn't invite strangers to your home. It's dangerous. You are not a stranger, Luma countered, rolling her eyes as if he were being particularly slow-witted. I told you. You are a veteran. I have been watching you for 3 weeks. You sit here every Tuesday and Thursday at 1800 hours. You look at the stars and you look like you want to cry, but you don't. You just fix the lights. Rowan was stunned. He had thought he was invisible. He had thought he was just a ghost haunting the machinery of the station. To think that this small creature had been cataloging his routine, analyzing his sorrow, was unsettling. Why? Rowan asked. Why me? Luma shrugged a gesture that was entirely human. Because Mommy needs a reason to smile. And she likes broken things. She says they have stories. She turned and pointed toward the far side of the dome, where the residential blocks of the Vixen tier stacked up like towering hives against the curved walls. Look, she commanded. Rowan followed her finger. He squinted against the artificial twilight. About 200 meters away, on the 4th level of the housing grid, there was a small, circular window. It was distinct from the others, because it was draped with cheap, colorful fairy lights that blinked in a slow, soothing rhythm. Inside the frame of the window, Rowan saw a silhouette. It was a Visari woman. She was wrapped in a thick blanket, huddled against the glass. Even from this distance, Rowan could see the faint, rhythmic pulsing of light emanating from her fur, the telltale bioluminescence of an active ember fever flare-up. It was a beautiful, terrifying symptom. The residual radiation of the warp drives, binding with the alien biology, creating a slow, burning fire within the blood. The figure seemed to be looking down at the plaza. As Luma waved her arm frantically over her head, the figure in the window shifted. A hand raised in a weak wave. And then she smiled. Rowan had excellent vision. It was a requirement for his job. He saw the smile clearly. It was not a smile of joy exactly. It was a smile of endurance. It was a smile that said, "I am in pain. My bones are burning, but my daughter is waving at me, so I will smile." The phrase Luma had said echoed in his mind. She smiles through her fever. It hit him with the force of a physical blow. He knew that smile. He had seen it on 1,000 faces in the triage centers, on the moons of Orestes. He had seen it on the faces of mothers trying to comfort their children while the orbital bombardment sirens wailed. It was the smile of defiance against despair. Rowan looked away, his breath hitching in his chest. He looked back at the crayon, drawing in his hand. "She is very sick, isn't she?" Rowan asked quietly. "Yes," Luma said, her voice losing a fraction of its bravado. "The doctor gives her medicine, but it costs many credits. Sometimes Mommy pretends she took it, but she saves it for later. She thinks I do not know. But I am a fox. I know everything." She looked up at him, her blue eyes piercing. "If you come, she will eat. She will want to tell you stories. She misses talking to people who understand the old war." Rowan gripped the paper. "I can't, Luma. I have work. I have another shift starting at—" He trailed off. He didn't have another shift. He was going back to his solitary quarters to stare at the wall and wait for sleep. "You are lying," Luma said flatly. "Your shift ended at 18:30. I checked the roster on the maintenance tablet when the supervisor was sleeping." Rowan let out a short, startled laugh. "You hacked the maintenance roster." "I looked at it. That is not hacking. That is observing." Luma took a step closer, reaching out to tug on the hem of his dirty jumpsuit. "Please, veteran. The soup is root vegetable. I stole the carrots myself from the hydroponics bay. They are fresh." The confession was delivered with such innocence that Rowan's resistance began to crumble. He looked at the window again. The light in the fur of the woman Sarah was pulsing faster now. She was in pain. "I am not a hero, Luma," Rowan said, his voice thick. "If your mother thinks I am the man who saved people, she might be disappointed. I am just the man who fixes the air filters." "That is okay," Luma said. "The air filters are important. Breathing is my third favorite thing to do." "What are the first two?" Rowan asked, despite himself. "Eating soup," she said instantly. "And finding treasures." She tapped the receipt paper in his hand. "This is a treasure." The artificial sun had fully set now. The dome lights hummed to life, casting long, stark shadows across the plaza. The wind from the fans picked up, carrying a chill. Luma released his pant leg. She took a step back. "Friday night," she said. 1900 hours. Apartment 4B in the Vixen tier. It is the one with the bells on the door. You cannot miss it. It smells like cinnamon and old stars. "Luma, I didn't say yes," Rowan protested weakly. "I will leave the chair empty," Luma declared. She adjusted her grip on her stack of papers. "Mommy smiles better when there is a guest, even a grumpy one." She didn't wait for him to argue. With a swish of her bushy tail, she turned and darted away, weaving through the crowd of commuters, with the agility of a creature born to survive in the margins. Rowan watched her go, a small spot of blue and orange, disappearing into the gray mass of the station. He sat alone on the bench for a long time. The station announcements droned on overhead, listing arrival times and quarantine protocols. The holographic directory flickered again. His fix had been temporary, a bandage on a deeper system failure. Rowan looked down at the receipt in his hand. The wax crayon felt waxy under his thumb. The drawing of the soup bowl looked ridiculous and heartbreaking. Soup for the sad man. He looked up at the window on the 4th level. The figure was still there, a faint glow in the darkness. He wondered if she was watching him. He wondered if she really knew who he was, or if she just constructed a fantasy out of a lonely man sitting on a bench. The quiet officer. He hadn't heard that name in 15 years. Rowan folded the paper carefully, treating it with more reverence than he showed his official work orders, and placed it in his breast pocket, right next to his heart. He stood up, picked up his cold coffee, and walked toward the exit. He didn't know if he would go to apartment 4B on Friday. He told himself he wouldn't. He told himself it was a bad idea to get involved, that he would only bring his own ghosts into their fragile home. But as he walked, he found himself checking the time, calculating how many hours were left until 1900 hours on Friday. And for the first time in a decade, the itch to fix something didn't feel like a compulsion. It felt like an invitation. The lights of the Vixen tier hummed below him, a chaotic galaxy of life struggling against the dark, and Rowan Hale stepped into the lift, carrying a piece of trash that felt heavier than a weapon. The lift ride down to the maintenance levels was silent, save for the rattle of the cage against the guide rails. Rowan leaned his forehead against the cool metal of the wall. The encounter with the Fox girl had rattled him more than he cared to admit. It had bypassed his defenses, slipped under the radar of his carefully constructed isolation. He lived in Sector 8, a block reserved for essential station personnel. It was sterile, efficient, and devoid of personality. His quarters consisted of a bunk, a sanitizer unit, and a small desk where he kept his few personal possessions, a datapad loaded with technical manuals, and a small magnetic sculpture he reconfigured endlessly when he couldn't sleep. When the lift doors slid open, he expected the usual silence of the corridor. Instead, he found Jade Okafor, leaning against the wall next to his door. Jade was a structural engineer, a woman of 42, with a laugh that could crack a hull plate, and a spirit that the war hadn't managed to crush. She was one of the few people on Crescent Harbor who bothered to learn Rowan's first name. "You're late, Hale," Jade said, pushing herself off the wall. She held 2 pouches of synthetic protein paste dinner. "I thought you fell into a turbine." Rowan keyed the lock to his door, the mechanism sliding open with a hiss. "Just a flickering light in the Star Garden," he muttered, stepping inside. "Couldn't leave it." Jade followed him in uninvited, but not unwelcome. She tossed one of the pouches onto his desk. "You and your lights. You know the station AI is supposed to handle the micro repairs, right? You're doing the machine's job for free." "The machine is slow," Rowan said, sitting heavily on the edge of his bunk. He didn't reach for the food. Jade sat on the chair, spinning it around to face him. She scrutinized him, her dark eyes narrowing. "You look like you've seen a phantom, Rowan. What happened up there?" Rowan hesitated. He could tell her. Jade was safe. She wouldn't laugh. But sharing the story felt like exposing the drawing in his pocket to the harsh light of reality. "Just tired," Rowan lied. "Long shift." The scrubbers in Sector 4 were clogged with silica dust again. Jade chewed on the corner of her food pouch, not buying it for a second. "Right, silica dust. That explains the 1,000-yard stare." "Look, Rowan, I know you prefer the company of oscillating fans to people, but Chief Darius Cole is on the warpath again." At the mention of the name, Rowan stiffened. "What does Cole want now?" "He's tightening the perimeter checks on the Vixen tier," Jade said, her voice dropping the playful tone. "He's citing biosecurity concerns. He says the Ember fever rates are ticking up and he's worried about a crossover mutation. He wants to restrict movement for the Visari. No more wandering the upper decks without a pass." Rowan felt the receipt paper burn against his chest. "He can't do that. The Crescent Treaty guarantees freedom of movement within the public zones." "Cole doesn't care about a 20-year-old piece of paper," Jade said with a shrug. "He cares about his metrics. He thinks the Visari are a drain on life support. If he restricts them, he can throttle the airflow to their sector to conserve resources. It's bureaucratic suffocation." Rowan's hand went to his pocket unconsciously. "That's illegal." "It's politics," Jade corrected. "And unless someone with actual pull stands up to him, he's going to do it. But hey, that's not our problem, right? We just fixed the pipes. She watched him closely, waiting for a reaction. Rowan stared at the floor. He wanted to shout that it was their problem that he had written the clause about freedom of movement specifically to prevent this kind of soft segregation. But to say, that would be to admit who he was. Right, Rowan said softly. We just fixed the pipes. Jade sighed, disappointed. She stood up. Eat your paste, Hale. It tastes like chicken if you close your eyes and have a vivid imagination. She headed for the door, but paused at the threshold. You know I saw a kid up there today. Little fox girl. She was asking the lift attendant which lever went to the maintenance deck. She had a drawing. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Rowan looked up. Jade. I'm just saying, Jade said, a small smile playing on her lips. If you're making friends, Rowan, be careful. Cole is looking for excuses. Don't give him one. The door slid shut, leaving Rowan alone in the silence of his room. He didn't eat the protein paste. Instead, he pulled the drawing out again. He traced the lines of the wax crayon. The invitation was for Friday. If Cole's new restrictions went into effect, Luma might not be able to come up to the Star Garden again. The Fox bench would be empty. Rowan stood up and walked to the small porthole window in his room. It faced the void, not the station, but in the reflection of the glass, he saw his own face. Graying hair, tired eyes, a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. She smiles through her fever. The Vasari woman Sarah was fighting a war against her own body every single day. And here he was hiding in a metal box, afraid of a dinner invitation. Friday, Rowan whispered to the reflection. He turned away from the window and went to his locker. Digging through the bottom past the spare hydro spanners and the emergency flares, he found a small, dusty box. Inside was a bottle of real wine, a vintage from a vineyard on Earth that no longer existed. He had been saving it for a special occasion, or perhaps for the day he finally decided to drink himself into oblivion. He wiped the dust off the bottle. Root vegetable soup, he muttered. It probably needs seasoning. Rowan Hale, the ghost of Crescent Harbor, placed the bottle on his desk next to the drawing. He didn't know if he was going to save anyone. He didn't know if he could stop a man like Darius Cole. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let a little girl with mismatched eyes eat dinner alone with an empty chair. As the station's night cycle took over, dimming the corridor lights to a low amber, Rowan sat down and began to clean his boots. If he was going to be a guest, he would look presentable. It was a small fix, a tiny repair in the fabric of his chaotic life. But it was a start. The corridor of the Vixen tier smelled of ozone burnt sugar and a pungent earthy spice that Rowan could not name. It was a sensory assault, compared to the sterile scrubbed air environment of the upper decks. Here, the lighting was dimmer, filtered through paper lanterns that hung from the exposed conduit pipes, casting soft, swaying shadows against the bulkhead walls. Rowan stood in front of the door marked 4B. He adjusted the collar of his jumpsuit, which he had obsessively cleaned, and pressed, though the oil stains on the knees were permanent residents. In his hand, he clutched the bottle of vintage wine by the neck, holding it with a white-knuckled grip, as if it were a volatile explosive device. The door was not like the standard hydraulic sliders of the station. Someone had painted it a vibrant, defiant teal. Strips of colorful recycled paper were taped around the frame, fluttering slightly in the draft from the ventilation shaft. In the center of the door hung a cluster of small brass bells, likely scavenged from old wind chimes or discarded instruments. Rowan raised his hand to knock, hesitated, and lowered it. "What are you doing, Hale?" he asked himself. "You are walking into a minefield. You are a 40-year-old man bringing wine to a refugee family you met because a child hacked a maintenance roster." He turned to leave. It was the sensible thing to do. He could go back to his quarters, drink the wine alone, and pretend the world ended at the edge of his bed. The door slid open before he could take a step. Luma stood there. She was wearing a different oversized shirt today, this one yellow, with a faded logo of a mining corporation on the chest. Her ears were perked so high they nearly touched the top of the doorframe, and her tail was a blur of motion behind her. "I heard your boots," Luma declared, her blue eyes sparkling. "You walk heavy, like a robot with a tummy ache." Rowan blinked, caught in the act of retreating. "I was just checking the address." Luma grabbed his hand. Her fingers were small, warm, and surprisingly strong. She pulled him across the threshold with a force that defied her size. "Mommy!" she shouted, her voice echoing in the small space. "The veteran is here. He brought a glass stick." Rowan stumbled into the apartment, nearly dropping the bottle. "It is wine, Luma, not a stick." "Mommy calls wine happy juice for sad days," Luma informed him, dragging him further inside. The apartment was a shock to Rowan's system. It was small, a standard single-occupant module that had been repurposed for two. But where Rowan's room was a gray box, this space was a riot of texture and warmth. Rugs woven from shredded fabric scraps covered the metal floor. The walls were draped with tapestries that depicted star maps and forests that no longer existed. Strings of fairy lights, the same ones he had seen from the observation deck, crisscrossed the ceiling, bathing the room in a golden amber glow. It felt less like a station module and more like a den, a burrow carved out of warmth in the middle of a cold void. In the center of the room, sitting on a pile of cushions at a low table, was Sarah. She looked different up close than she had through the window. She was thin, her cheekbones sharp under her russet fur. Her eyes were large, a deep liquid amber that seemed to catch every photon of light in the room. She wore a simple tunic, and a thick woolen shawl was wrapped around her shoulders, despite the ambient heat of the room. What struck Rowan most was the faint, rhythmic pulse of light beneath her fur. It traveled in waves starting at her chest and rippling out to her fingertips and the tip of her tail. It was beautiful, ethereal, and terrifying. It was the visual signature of the ember fever, the body's cells fighting a war against ionizing radiation that had bonded to their DNA. Sarah looked up from a bowl of vegetables she was peeling. She paused, her gaze sweeping over Rowan from his graying hair to his polished boots. A corner of her mouth quirked up. "So," she said, her voice raspy, but rich with amusement. "This is the legendary veteran my daughter has been stalking." Rowan cleared his throat, feeling heat rise in his neck. "I wouldn't say stalking, more like aggressive observation." Sarah laughed. It was a dry hacking sound that turned into a cough. She pressed a hand to her chest, wincing, as the light beneath her fur flared brighter for a second. Luma was at her side instantly, patting her back with a solemn expression. When the coughing subsided, Sarah waved a hand dismissively. "Forgive me. My lungs are dramatic today. Please come in. Do not stand there like a structural support beam." Rowan stepped forward and placed the wine bottle on the low table. "I brought this. I wasn't sure what the protocol was." Sarah eyed the bottle. "Vintage Earth Red. A bold choice for a root vegetable soup. You must be trying to impress me, or you are trying to get me drunk so I do not notice the soup is watery." "I am just a mechanic, ma'am," Rowan said, sitting awkwardly on a cushion that felt too low for his knees. "I don't have ulterior motives." "Stop calling yourself just a mechanic," Sarah chided gently. She picked up the bottle, inspecting the label. "And stop looking at me like I am going to break. I am sick, Rowan Hale, not made of glass." Rowan froze. "You know my name." "Luma told me," Sarah said, glancing at her daughter, who was busy arranging 3 bowls with geometric precision. "And I have ears. People talk in the Vixen tier. They say there is a human technician who fixes the lights in the corridors without filing a work order. They say he has sad eyes and walks like he is carrying the weight of the hull plating on his back." "I don't," Rowan started to protest. "You look less like a soldier and more like a technician who got lost on the way to the engine room," Sarah teased, her eyes dancing. "Are you sure you fought in the war? Maybe you just fixed the coffee machines for the generals." Rowan felt a strange sensation in his chest. It was a lightness, a loosening of the knot that had been there for years. Logistics, he said, half-truthfully. I made sure things got where they needed to go, including coffee. Luma flopped down onto a cushion between them, crossing her legs. She looked at Rowan, then at her mother, then back at Rowan. He fixes lights, Luma said seriously. He fixed the map in the dome. I saw him. She leaned forward, whispering conspiratorially to her mother. If he can fix the lights, maybe he can fix your heart, Mommy. The doctor says your heart is tired. The air in the room seemed to vanish for a second. Rowan stopped breathing. It was a child's logic, pure, direct, and devastating. Sarah's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second before she reached out and ruffled Luma's ears. My heart is fine, little spark. It is just busy keeping me warm. Now, serve the soup before our guest thinks we are starving him. The soup was thin, but the spices smuggled surely gave it a depth that the protein paste in the mess hall never had. They ate in a comfortable rhythm. Rowan found himself talking. He talked about the atmospheric scrubbers, about the stubborn humidity sensors in Sector 8, about the way the artificial gravity fluctuated on the third deck. It was boring technical talk, but Sarah listened as if he were reciting poetry. She asked questions. She made fun of the station's architecture. She made him laugh, a rusty scraping sound that startled him. It is not just a fever, Sarah said later, when Luma had moved to the corner to draw on the back of a discarded schematic. The meal was finished, and the wine was half gone. The mood had shifted, settling into something quieter, more intimate. Rowan looked at her. The glow under her skin was constant now, a low-level hum of light. I know. I've seen it before, in the triage centers. Sarah traced the rim of her cup. It comes in waves. Some days I feel like I could run up the ventilation shafts. Other days it feels like my blood is boiling. The heat comes from the inside. There are treatments, Rowan said, his voice low. Inhibitors. Cellular stabilizers. For citizens with Class A insurance, Sarah corrected him, her tone devoid of bitterness, stating a simple fact. For Vasari refugees, we get generic pain suppressors and a pat on the head. Dr. Solis is kind, she tries, but her hands are tied by the budget. She puts my name on the list for the advanced stabilizers, and every week the list gets shuffled. Humans first. Essential personnel first. Rowan gripped his cup. He knew that list. He knew the algorithms that sorted lives by value. He had helped write the early versions of them during the evacuation protocols. Efficiency, the generals had called it. Triage logic. It's not right, Rowan muttered. It is survival, Sarah said. She looked at Luma, who was humming a tune to herself. I do not mind the pain, Rowan. I really do not. But I worry about her. If I burn out, she has no one. The community takes care of its own, yes, but she needs a parent. She needs a future that isn't just scavenging receipt paper. She turned her amber eyes to him. That is why I let her invite you. Not because I need saving, but because she wanted to meet the man who fixes things. She needs to believe that things can be fixed. Rowan looked at his hands, scared, stained with grease. I broke more things than I ever fixed, Sarah. Then you have a lot of work to catch up on, she said softly. The change in the station's atmosphere began 3 days later. It wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, creeping frost. It started with a public service announcement broadcast on the main frequency. The voice of the station AI, normally smooth and melodic, carried a clipped, urgent tone. Attention all residents. Biosecurity Alert Level 3 is now in effect. Anomalous thermal readings and viral markers have been detected in the lower habitation sectors. Residents are advised to minimize travel between tiers. Mandatory health screenings will commence for all non-human biologicals. Rowan was in the mess hall when he heard it. He froze his spoon, hovering over his tray. Around him, the hum of conversation spiked. About time, a man at the next table grunted. He was a cargo hauler, thick-necked and red-faced. Those foxes are walking incubators. I swear one of them coughed near me in the lift yesterday, and I've been feeling hot all morning. They shouldn't even be on the main station, his companion agreed. They should have kept them on the quarantine moon. It's unsafe. Rowan slowly lowered his spoon. A cold anger, sharp and unfamiliar, twisted in his gut. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the metal floor. The noise drew a few glances, but he ignored them. He took his tray to the reclamation slot and slammed it in with enough force to make the attendant droid beep in alarm. "Easy, Tiger," a voice said behind him. It was Jade. She was leaning against the condiment dispenser, her arms crossed. She wasn't smiling. "You heard the news?" she asked, falling into step beside him as he stormed out of the mess hall. "It's a scare tactic," Rowan growled. "There is no virus. It's the ember fever. It's non-contagious unless you exchange blood or spinal fluid. You know that. I know that." "Chief Cole knows that too, probably," Jade said quietly. "But fear is a useful tool. If people are scared of getting sick, they won't complain when he cuts power to the Vixen tier to divert it to the luxury suites. Or when he starts talking about relocation." Rowan stopped walking. "Relocation." Jade looked around to make sure no one was listening. "That is the rumor in the maintenance ducts. Cole is drafting a proposal to move the Visari population to the outer rim cargo bays, the unpressurized ones. He says they can be retrofitted. I say it's a freezer." She looked at Rowan, her expression softening. "You've been down there a lot lately, Rowan. I saw the requisition forms. You requested a surplus heating coil and a bag of high-grade nutrient supplements. You don't eat supplements." Rowan didn't deny it. He had stolen the coil to fix the heating unit in Sarah's apartment. The supplements were for Luma. "They are just people, Jade," Rowan said. "They are liabilities to the administration," Jade countered. "Look, I like that you found a hobby that isn't staring into space. But be careful. If Cole thinks you are a sympathizer or, worse, a carrier, he will revoke your clearance. And then, who is going to fix the scrubbers?" "I don't care about my clearance," Rowan said. "You should," Jade warned. "Because without it you can't help anyone." That evening, Rowan went back to the Vixen tier. The atmosphere had changed completely. The corridors were quieter. The paper lanterns seemed dimmer. Visari residents hurried from door to door, heads bowed, avoiding eye contact. The playful chaos was gone, replaced by a tense, suffocating silence. When he arrived at apartment 4, Baluma didn't open the door immediately. She peered through the crack, her ears flattened against her skull. When she saw it was him, she opened it just wide enough for him to slip in. "The speaker said we are sick," Luma whispered, as she locked the door behind him. "Are we sick, veteran?" Rowan knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. "No, Luma. You are not sick. The speaker is mistaken." "Mommy is hot," Luma said, her voice trembling. "She is hotter than before." Rowan looked toward the pile of cushions. Sarah was there, but she wasn't sitting up. She was curled into a tight ball, shivering violently. The glow from her fur was blindingly bright, lighting up the dim room like a distress flare. Rowan was at her side in 2 strides. He touched her forehead. It was burning. Not just fever hot, but radiator hot. "Sarah," he said urgently. "Sarah, can you hear me?" She opened her eyes. They were glassy and unfocused. "Rowan," she rasped. "Is the light fixed?" "We need to get her to the clinic," Rowan said, looking at Luma. "Now." "But the announcement," Luma cried. "They said no travel. They said strict curfew." "To hell with the curfew," Rowan swore. He scooped Sarah up in his arms. She was terrifyingly light, like a bird made of hollow bones and fire. She groaned, her head lolling against his shoulder. "Grab her ID chip, Luma," Rowan commanded. "And stay close to me. Hold on to my belt." They moved through the corridors quickly. Rowan used the maintenance shortcuts, the narrow service hallways that bypassed the main checkpoints. Luma ran silently beside him, clutching his belt loop, her face set in a mask of determination that was too old for her years. They emerged near the medical bay on deck 5. It was crowded. Dozens of people, mostly humans, were queued up demanding preventative screenings and masks. The air was thick with panic and the smell of antiseptic. Rowan pushed through the crowd, ignoring the protests and shoves. "Emergency," he barked, using his command voice, the voice he hadn't used since the evacuation decks of the arrestees. "Make way." He reached the intake desk. A harried nurse, a young man with dark circles under his eyes, looked up from his datapad. He saw Rowan, and then he saw the glowing Visari woman in his arms. "No intake for non-citizens right now," the nurse said automatically. "We are at capacity. There is a holding area in Sector 9 for symptomatic cases." "She is not a case," Rowan snarled. "She is going into thermal shock. She needs a stabilizer drip immediately." "I can't authorize that," the nurse said, shrinking back slightly. "Dr. Solis is with the Chief of Security. The protocols are clear. Humans first during a Level 3 alert." "She is dying," Luma screamed, her small voice cracking. She slammed her tiny fist on the high counter. "Help her!" The nurse looked sympathetic but helpless. "I'm sorry. You have to go to Sector 9. Rowan felt the heat radiating off Sarah. She was convulsing now, small tremors racking her frame. Sector 9 was a holding pen. If she went there, she would burn out before morning. Rowan leaned over the counter. He didn't shout. He lowered his voice to a deadly, icy whisper. "Listen to me. I am a senior maintenance technician. If you do not page Dr. Solis right now, I will go down to the environmental control room, and I will shut off the air circulation to this entire medical bay. I will suck the oxygen out of this room before you can blink. Do you understand me?" The nurse's eyes went wide. He looked at Rowan's ID badge, then at his face. He saw a man who was not bluffing. "I'll page her," the nurse stammered. He tapped his comms unit frantically. Moments later, the double doors swung open. Dr. Mira Solis stepped out looking exhausted. She spotted Rowan and the bundle of glowing fur in his arms. "Get her into Trauma Room 2, Dr. Solis ordered, bypassing the nurse completely. "Now!" As Rowan rushed past the desk following the doctor, he saw a figure standing near the entrance of the clinic, flanked by 2 armed station guards. It was Chief Darius Cole. Cole was a tall man, immaculately groomed with a uniform that didn't have a single crease. He watched the scene unfold with cool detachment. His eyes locked onto Rowan's. There was no hostility in his gaze, only a calculating assessment. He stepped forward, blocking Rowan's path just for a second. "That is a restricted resource you are demanding, Technician Hale," Cole said. His voice was smooth, cultured. "For a non-essential refugee." Rowan didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He shifted Sarah's weight, shielding her from Cole's gaze. "She is a patient," Rowan said through gritted teeth. "She is a vector," Cole corrected. "You of all people should understand the numbers, Hale. I pulled your service record. Logistics Officer 3rd Fleet. You made the hard calls on the evacuation ships. You signed the manifest that left people behind to save the majority." Rowan flinched. The secret he had kept buried was now lying on the sterile floor between them. "I am not that man anymore," Rowan said. "Aren't you?" Cole raised an eyebrow. "You are still calculating. You are just calculating for one instead of the many. That is a dangerous variable on a station with limited resources." "Move," Rowan said. Cole stared at him for a long heartbeat. Then he stepped aside. "Go. Save your stray. But remember, Hale's sentimentality is a luxury we cannot afford. The relocation order is on the Council's docket for tomorrow morning. Prepare yourself." Rowan didn't look back. He rushed into the trauma room and laid Sarah onto the biobed. Dr. Solis immediately began attaching sensors. The room filled with the rhythmic beeping of monitors. "Her core temp is 42 degrees, Dr. Solis muttered. "She is critical. Hand me that injector." Rowan worked beside the doctor, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He handed her instruments before she asked for them. He anticipated her moves. He held Sarah's shoulders down as the convulsions hit again. "It hurts," Sarah whimpered, her eyes squeezing shut. "I know," Rowan whispered, leaning close to her ear. "I know it hurts. Stay with us, Sarah. Luma is watching." At the mention of her daughter, Sarah's breathing hitched. She forced her eyes open. She looked at Rowan, really looked at him through the haze of pain. "You," she breathed. "You yelled at the nurse. You threatened the air supply." "I was improvising," Rowan said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "You are a terrible liar," she whispered, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "You sounded like a soldier." The stabilizer drug hit her system. The glow beneath her fur began to dim, receding from a blinding white to a soft, pulsing amber. Her body relaxed. The heat radiating from her skin began to dissipate. Dr. Solis exhaled a long breath. "She is stable. We caught it just in time. Another 20 minutes and her nervous system would have fried." Rowan slumped against the wall, his knees suddenly weak. He looked through the glass partition. Luma was sitting on a chair in the waiting area, swinging her legs, staring at the door with wide, terrified eyes. Rowan waved to her. Luma slumped with relief, pressing her forehead against the glass. Dr. Solis turned to Rowan. She was wiping her hands on a towel. "That was risky, Rowan. Cole was watching. He knows who you are now. Or at least he knows you are not just a grease monkey." "He can know whatever he wants," Rowan said, watching Sarah sleep. Her chest rose and fell in a peaceful rhythm. "He is going to push for the relocation," Solis warned. "He is using this cluster, which is just 5 cases, by the way, as a pretext. He wants to move them to the outer hangars. The radiation shielding out there is minimal. It will kill them, Rowan, slowly but surely." Rowan looked at Sarah's sleeping face. He looked at the scars on his own hands. He thought about the treaty he had written 20 years ago, a document full of noble words that was currently gathering dust in a digital archive. "He won't move them," Rowan said softly. "How can you stop him?" Solis asked. "You are one man against the Security Council." Rowan turned to face the doctor. His expression was hard, the tiredness gone, replaced by a steel that had been forged in the fires of a galactic war. "I am not just one man," Rowan said. "I am the man who wrote the rules he is trying to break. And I think it is time I reminded him how to read." He walked out of the trauma room to get Luma. As he picked the little girl up, she buried her face in his neck, smelling of tears and fear. "Is Mommy okay?" she asked. "She is going to be fine," Rowan promised. "I fixed it." "You fixed her heart?" Luma asked sleepily. Rowan paused. He looked back at Sarah one last time. "We are working on it," he said. He carried Luma back into the room and sat in the chair beside the bed. He didn't leave. He didn't go back to his quarters. He sat there holding the sleeping child, watching the sleeping mother, and waited for the morning. The quiet officer was dead. Rowan Hale was awake, and for the first time in years, he had a mission. Outside the clinic, the station hummed on, indifferent to the small dramas of its inhabitants. But in the office of the Chief of Security, Darius Cole was looking at a holographic display of Rowan Hale's service record, his finger hovering over a command marked Authorized Detainment. The game had changed. The pieces were moving, and the board was set for a collision that would shake Crescent Harbor to its core. The announcement did not come with a siren. It did not arrive with the flashing red strobes of a hull breach warning or the mechanical shriek of a pressure seal failure. Instead, it arrived with the terrifying sterile politeness of a bureaucratic algorithm. The public address system in the Vixen tier crackled to life at exactly 0800 hours. The voice was the station's artificial intelligence synthesized to sound soothing, maternal, and undeniably human. "Attention residents of Sectors 4 through 9. In accordance with the new biosafety and sanitation protocols enacted by the Crescent Harbor Security Council, a mandatory relocation order has been issued. To ensure the health and stability of the station's atmospheric systems, all non-human residents currently residing in the Vixen tier will be temporarily transferred to Habitat Zone 12. Rowan Hale stood in the narrow doorway of Sarah's apartment, a mug of lukewarm tea in his hand. He froze as the words washed over the corridor. Around him, the morning bustle of the Vessery community ground to a halt. A mother dropped a basket of laundry. Two kits playing chase with a ball of foil stopped mid-stride, their ears swiveling toward the speakers. Zone 12, a neighbor whispered, clutching his scarf. That is the outer cargo rim. There are no heaters there. The voice continued, oblivious to the terror it was dispensing. This measure is temporary. Shuttle transport will begin at 1200 hours. Please pack only essential items. 1 bag per resident. Thank you for your cooperation in keeping Crescent Harbor safe. The click of the speaker turning off echoed like a gunshot. Inside the apartment, the air felt heavy. Sarah sat on the edge of her sleeping mat, her breathing shallow. She was already having a bad day. The ember fever was flaring again, a low-grade burn that made her fur shimmer with a dull, sickly light. Luma sat at her feet, gripping her mother's ankle with both hands, her mismatched eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly curdled into fear. Temporary, Sarah rasped the word, tasting like ash in her mouth. They always say temporary. That is what they said when they put us on the transport ships at Orestes. Just for the jump, they said. Just until we clear the radiation belt. Rowan crushed the handle of his mug. The ceramic snapped, slicing into his thumb, but he did not feel the pain. He knew Zone 12. He had serviced the airlocks there 2 months ago. It was a retrofitted hangar bay, uninsulated with minimal shielding against the cosmic background radiation. For a healthy human, it was uncomfortable. For a Vasari suffering from ember fever, where the body was already fighting an internal radiation war, it was a death sentence. They cannot do this, Rowan said, his voice low. It is a violation of the habitation codes. Codes are for citizens, Rowan, Sarah said, closing her eyes as a tremor ran through her. We are guests. Guests can be moved to the attic. I am going to the meeting, Rowan said abruptly. He set the broken mug on the table. Elder Thalen is calling an emergency assembly in the atrium. You should stay here. Rest. Sarah opened her eyes. The amber irises were clouded, but the fire behind them was not out. No. If my people are being marched into the dark, I will not be lying in bed while it happens. She stood up, swaying dangerously. Luma scrambled up to support her, wedging her small shoulder under Sarah's arm. I have got you, Mommy, Luma said, her voice trembling but determined. I am strong. I ate all my vegetables. Rowan moved to help, but Sarah held up a hand. I can walk, Rowan. Save your strength. We are going to need it. The Stargarden Dome was usually a place of transit, but today, the atrium of the Vixen tier, a smaller, grimmier version of the Upper Decks Plaza, was a sea of orange and russet fur. Hundreds of Vasari had gathered. The air smelled of fear, sent a sharp, musky odor that Vasari released involuntarily when threatened. Elder Thalen stood on a crate in the center of the crowd. He was an ancient fox, his fur turned completely white with age, his tail thin and brittle. He held a wooden staff, tapping it rhythmically against the metal floor to call for silence. We must be calm. Thalen's voice was thin, wheezing, but it carried the weight of authority. Panic will only give Chief Cole reason to use force. We must organize. We must pack. We will show them that we are orderly. Orderly, a younger Vasari shouted from the back. We are being sent to a freezer. My sister has a fever. If she goes to the rim, she will burn out in 2 days. We have the Crescent Treaty, another voice cried out. It promised us sanctuary. It promised us medical aid. Rowan stood at the edge of the crowd, his back pressed against a support pillar. He felt like an intruder. He felt like a ghost. The mention of the treaty made his stomach churn. He closed his eyes, and suddenly he was not in the atrium. He was back on the command deck of the transport ship Aegis. The air was recycled and stale. The holographic displays were screaming red. Lieutenant Hale. "We are at 110% capacity," the navigation officer had said. "Life support cannot handle the load. Override the safeties," the younger Rowan had ordered. His uniform had been crisp, then his conscience clean. "Pack them in." "We don't leave anyone on the moon, sir. If the shielding fails during the jump, the radiation leakage." "It won't fail. Just do it." He had saved 20,000 lives that day, and he had condemned half of them to a slow, agonizing illness. Every time he looked at the glowing fur of an ember fever patient, he saw his own signature on the override command. He was the architect of their salvation and their destruction. "Veteran." A small hand tugged at his trousers. Rowan snapped back to the present. Luma was looking up at him. She was crying, silently, big tears tracking through the fur on her cheeks. "Why is everyone screaming?" Luma whispered. "Is the bad man coming?" Before Rowan could answer, a collective gasp ripped through the crowd. Near the center of the room, Sarah had let go of the elder's arm. She took a step forward, intending to speak, to calm the angry youth who was shouting about rebellion. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, a blinding pulse of light erupted from her chest. It was so bright, it illuminated the faces of the Visari around her like a flashbang. Sarah crumpled. She did not fall gracefully. She hit the metal deck with a sickening, heavy thud. "Mommy." Luma's scream tore through the noise of the crowd, sharp and shattering. Rowan moved. He did not think. He did not calculate. The technician who fixed the lights vanished. The logistics officer vanished. The man who remained was pure instinct. He plowed through the crowd, shoving bodies aside with a force that sent people stumbling. "Move! Make a hole!" He reached Sarah, just as Luma threw herself onto her mother's chest. The little girl was sobbing, her hands frantically patting Sarah's cheeks. "Wake up, Mommy! You have to wake up! The soup is not ready!" Rowan dropped to his knees. The heat coming off Sarah was intense. It was like kneeling next to an open furnace. He placed his hand on her neck. Her pulse was erratic, thready, and dangerously fast. Her skin was vibrating. "She is in thermal runaway," Rowan said, his voice calm, detached, terrifying. He looked up. The crowd had formed a circle, staring in horror. Elder Thalen looked paralyzed. "Luma, let go," Rowan commanded gently but firmly. He pulled the child back. "Fix her." Luma grabbed Rowan's collar, shaking him with all her tiny strength. Her blue eyes locked onto his, demanding, accusing, pleading. "You fix the lights. You fix the door. Fix her. You are a veteran. Do something." The words hit Rowan like a physical blow. Do something. He had spent 20 years doing nothing. He had spent 20 years fixing machines because machines did not bleed when he made a mistake. But machines did not hold his hand. Machines did not draw pictures of him eating soup. Rowan slid his arms under Sarah's knees and shoulders. He lifted her. She was burning hot, scorching his hands through his gloves, but he tightened his grip. "Where are you going?" Elder Thalen stammered. "The shuttle. We must wait for the shuttle." "She will be dead before the shuttle arrives," Rowan snarled. He turned to the crowd. "Get out of my way." He ran. He ran with a speed he did not know he still possessed. He sprinted out of the atrium, Luma scrambling to keep up at his heels. He hit the corridor and turned toward the lift. "Hold the door!" he roared at a startled maintenance drone. The machine obeyed its sensors, detecting the urgency in his voice. Rowan burst into the lift, Luma diving in after him. He slammed his hand on the override key. "Medical deck. Priority Alpha." The lift shot upward. Sarah groaned in his arms. Her head rolled back and a trickle of bioluminescent fluid leaked from her nose. It was glowing blue. "Stay with me, Sarah," Rowan whispered, rocking her slightly. "Don't you dare quit on me. You have a daughter to raise. You have a veteran to torment." Luma was huddled in the corner of the lift, her tail wrapped around her eyes. She was chanting something softly. Mommy Fox is strong. Mommy Fox is strong. The lift doors dinged open on the medical deck. It was chaos. The relocation order had caused a panic here too. People were shouting at the reception staff, demanding masks, demanding clearance. Security guards were trying to maintain order. Rowan did not stop at the desk. He did not ask for permission. He barreled through the waiting area, heading straight for the double doors of the trauma unit. "Sir, you can't go in there," a guard shouted, reaching for his stun baton. Rowan didn't even slow down. He stiff-armed the guard, catching him in the chest plate and knocking him backward into a row of chairs. It was a move from basic training executed with rusty but effective muscle memory. He kicked the trauma doors open. Dr. Mira Solis was stitching up a worker's hand. She jumped as the doors banged against the wall. She spun around, scalpel raised. "What in the hell?" "Thermal runaway," Rowan barked. He laid Sarah onto the nearest empty biobed. "Stage 4. She is leaking coolant fluid from the nasal cavity. Her core temp is 43 degrees and rising. I need ice packs, I need the heavy-duty stabilizers, and I need a hyper-oxygenated saline drip. Now, Mira." Dr. Solis stared at him for a fraction of a second. She saw the sweat on his face, the desperation in his eyes, and the absolute unwavering competence in his voice. This was not Rowan, the maintenance man. "Nurse!" Solis shouted, snapping into action. "Crash cart, bed 3, get the cooling blanket!" She rushed to the bed, shining a light into Sarah's eyes. "Rowan, hold her down. If she seizes, she breaks a bone." Rowan pinned Sarah's shoulders to the mattress. Her body bucked, arching off the bed as the fever spiked. A low, agonizing, keening sound escaped her throat. "It's okay," Rowan murmured near her ear, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. "I have got you. I am not letting go." "Biphasic stabilizer ready," Solis announced, jamming a hypospray against Sarah's neck. "Injecting." The drug hissed into Sarah's bloodstream. For a long, terrifying moment, nothing happened. The heat coming off her was still intense enough to make the air shimmer. Then slowly, the violent arching stopped. Sarah collapsed back onto the mattress limp. The blinding light of her fur dimmed to a soft, rhythmic pulse. "Heart rate stabilizing," the nurse called out, his voice shaking. "Temperature dropping, 41, 40.5. Rowan exhaled, his head dropping forward until his forehead rested on the edge of the bed. He was shaking. Adrenaline was leaving his system, leaving behind a cold void. "You are insane, Rowan," Dr. Solis whispered, checking the monitors. "You assaulted a guard. You broke protocol. Chief Cole is going to have your head on a pike." "Let him try," Rowan said, straightening up. He looked around. Luma was standing in the doorway, her hands clutching the frame, looking small and terrified. Rowan waved her over. She ran to him, burying her face in his stomach. He stroked her head, his hand trembling slightly. "Well," a cool, clipped voice spoke from the entrance of the trauma bay. "This is a dramatic scene, even for you, Hale." The room went silent. The nurses stopped moving. Dr. Solis stiffened. Chief Darius Cole stood in the doorway. He was flanked by 4 armored security officers. His face was impassive, but his eyes were cold chips of flint. He held a data pad in one hand and a stun baton in the other. "Step away from the patient, Hale," Cole said calmly. "You are under arrest for assaulting a station officer, disrupting medical services, and violating a Level 3 biosafety order." Rowan did not step away. He turned slowly, keeping one hand on Sarah's shoulder and the other on Luma's head. He looked at Cole. "She was dying," Rowan said. "She is a refugee subject to relocation," Cole countered. "If she is sick, she belongs in the quarantine hold, not taking up a trauma bed reserved for citizens." Cole gestured to his guards. "Take him, and prepare the Vasari female for transport to Zone 12. If she can be moved, she moves." "She cannot be moved," Dr. Solis interjected, stepping in front of the bed. "She is unstable, Darius. If you move her to unshielded space, the radiation will kill her in an hour." That is a risk the council is willing to take to protect the station, Cole said, his voice hardening. Doctor, stand down or you will be relieved of duty. The guards stepped forward. The heavy thud of their boots on the floor was the only sound in the room. Rowan looked at the guards. He looked at the doctor. He looked at Luma, who was looking up at him with absolute trust. You fix things. Rowan took a deep breath. He released Luma and stepped forward, placing himself between the bed and the guards. He stood up to his full height. He was not a tall man, but at that moment he seemed to fill the room. Article 9, Rowan said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a laser. Cole paused. Excuse me. The Crescent Treaty, Rowan said, his voice gaining strength. Article 9, Section 4. In the event of a medical emergency involving a displaced person, said person is granted the full rights and privileges of a citizen until stabilized. Furthermore, no mass relocation of a protected species may occur without the unanimous consent of a medical tribunal. And Rowan paused, his eyes locking onto Cole's. And the explicit approval of the signing officers, Cole laughed. It was a short, dismissive bark. You are quoting law from 20 years ago, Hale. That treaty is a relic, and the signing officers most are dead or retired on the core worlds. They do not care about a few foxes on a mining station. One of them cares, Rowan said. He reached into the collar of his grease-stained jumpsuit. He pulled out a chain. Hanging from it was not a mechanic's ID tag, but a small, tarnished piece of silver metal. It was a command key, old style, embedded with a microfilament verification chip. Rowan held it up. Computer, Rowan said, addressing the room's terminal. Verify identity. Service number Alpha 904 Logos. The medical terminal chirped. A blue holographic light swept over Rowan's face and the key in his hand. Identity confirmed, the computer's voice announced. Colonel Rowan Hale, Logistics Command 3rd Fleet. Status retired with honors. Clearance level diplomatic class A. The silence that followed was absolute. Dr. Solis gasped. The nurse dropped a tray of instruments. The guards hesitated, looking at each other. Rowan lowered the key, but he kept his gaze fixed on Cole. I drafted the Crescent Treaty, Darius. I wrote Article 9 specifically because I knew men like you would eventually try to do exactly what you are doing today. I signed that document. My signature is on the original charter of this station's refugee protocol. Cole's face had lost its composure. The mask of bureaucratic indifference slipped, revealing shock and a flash of anger. You are a maintenance tech. You fix the toilets. I fix what is broken, Rowan said coldly. And right now, this station is broken. You are violating a galactic treaty. If you move these people to Zone 12, I will not just file a complaint. I will reactivate my commission. I will transmit a Priority 1 distress signal to the core worlds, claiming a violation of the armistice. I will bring a Federation inquiry fleet to your doorstep, so fast your head will spin. He took a step toward Cole. Do you want that, Chief? Do you want the Federation auditing your logs? Do you want them to see how you have been siphoning power from the Vixen tier? Cole stared at him. His jaw worked tight. He looked at the glowing command key, then at the guards who were now looking at Rowan with a mixture of fear and awe. He had lost the room. He had lost the moral high ground and, more importantly, he had lost the legal footing. The relocation order comes from the Council, Cole said, his voice stiff. Then I suggest you go tell the Council that Colonel Hale has invoked the emergency stay clause, Rowan said. Nobody moves. Not today. Not to Zone 12. Cole glared at him for a long, tense moment. He looked at the sick woman on the bed. He looked at the defiant mechanic who had suddenly become a titan. This is not over, Hale, Cole hissed. You can wave your old medals around, but the station is still over capacity. Reality does not care about your treaty. Get out of my infirmary, Rowan said. Cole signaled his guards. We are leaving, for now. He turned on his heel and marched out. The doors swung shut behind him. Rowan stood there for a moment, the adrenaline crashing out of him. His knees gave way. He sat down heavily on the stool next to Sarah's bed. Dr. Solis was staring at him. "Colonel," she whispered. You were a colonel." Rowan rubbed his face with his hands. "I was a lot of things, Mira. Most of them I am not proud of." A soft sound came from the bed. Rowan turned. Sarah's eyes were open. She was watching him. She was weak pale, and her fur was matted with sweat, but she was awake. "You," she whispered. Her voice was a broken rasp. Rowan leaned in. "I am here, Sarah. You are safe. Cole is gone." Sarah reached out a trembling hand. Rowan took it. Her paw was hot but not burning. She squeezed his fingers with surprising strength. "You wrote it?" she asked. "The treaty." "Yes," Rowan admitted, shame coloring his voice. "I wrote the words. It was the least I could do after the ships." Sarah pulled his hand closer, pressing it against her cheek. Tears welled up in her amber eyes. "You hid. All this time. You walked past us in the corridors. You let us think we were alone. You had this voice, this power, and you fixed lamps." It was not just gratitude. It was anger. It was the hurt of a people who had suffered while their protectors swept floors. "I am sorry," Rowan choked out. "I thought if I stayed dead, the past would stay dead. I thought I did not deserve to lead." Sarah looked at him. She saw the guilt that had eaten him hollow for 20 years. She saw the fear. But she also saw the man who had just stood down an armed security team for her. "You are an idiot, Rowan Hale," she whispered, a tear sliding down her nose. "A brave, stupid idiot." "I know," Rowan said. "Don't you dare hide again," Sarah said fiercely. "If you are a colonel, then act like one. Save us. Really save us this time." "I will," Rowan promised. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed the knuckles. "I am done hiding." Luma crawled up onto the bed, careful of the wires. She curled up next to her mother's legs, resting her chin on her paws. She looked at Rowan. "You used your loud voice," Luma noted approvingly. "I liked it. It made the bad man shrink." Rowan smiled a tired, broken, genuine smile. "I guess it did, little fox." "Are you going to fix everything now?" Luma asked. Rowan looked at the door where Cole had exited. He knew this was just a pause. The council would regroup. They would find a loophole. They would come back harder. "I am going to try," Rowan said. He stood up. He took the silver command key from around his neck and clenched it in his fist. "Where are you going?" Dr. Solis asked. "The council meeting is in an hour," Rowan said. "They are expecting a relocation report. Instead, they are going to get a history lesson." He looked back at Sarah. She nodded slowly. It was permission. It was a blessing. Rowan Hale turned and walked out of the infirmary. He did not walk with the stooped shoulders of a mechanic anymore. He walked with the stride of a man who had commanded fleets, a man who had made mistakes, and a man who was finally ready to fix them. The war was not over. It had just moved to a new battlefield, and this time, he was not going to leave anyone behind. The victory in the council chamber did not end with a parade. There were no confetti cannons fired from the upper decks, and the station's artificial intelligence did not play a triumphant anthem over the loudspeakers. Instead, the victory arrived in the form of a quiet, grudging administrative memorandum issued at 0900 hours the following morning. The memorandum, signed by a reluctant Chief Darius Cole and stamped by the station governor, authorized the immediate repurposing of Cargo Bay 5 Alpha. It was no longer a storage depot for surplus hydraulic fluid and decommissioned airlock parts. It was now designated as the Ember Care and Community Outreach Center, a pilot program operating under the newly reactivated Article 9 of the Crescent Treaty. The relocation to the freezing outer rim was canceled. The Visari were staying. Rowan Hale stood in the center of Bay 5 Alpha, looking at the chaos of construction. The space was vast, echoing, and smelled of stale oil and potential. It is a bit of a dump, isn't it? Jade Okafor said, walking up beside him. She was holding a data pad and chewing on a stylus. But it has good bones. The ventilation is separate from the main grid, so Cole can't whine about cross-contamination. It needs work, Rowan said, his eyes scanning the rusted catwalks and the flickering overhead panels. We need to route a dedicated power line for the medical stabilizers. The standard grid won't handle the load if we have more than 3 patients in a thermal runaway at once. Jade raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips. I thought you were going back to the shadows, Colonel. I thought your cameo as a hero was a one-time engagement. Rowan sighed, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit. He had tried to go back to his routine. He had tried to pick up his tools and return to the anonymous rhythm of fixing broken gaskets. But the station looked different now. The people looked different. When he walked down the corridor, the maintenance drones seemed to salute him, and the Visari stopped and bowed their heads. Dr. Solis needs help with the layout, Rowan muttered defensively. And I know the schematics of this bay better than anyone. I'm just consulting. Right, consulting, Jade laughed. Just like you were just fixing a light when you met the Fox kid. Admit it, Rowan, you like it. You like having a mission that isn't just keeping the air scrubbers from choking on dust. Rowan didn't answer her, but he didn't deny it either. For the first time since the war ended, the weight in his chest felt different. It was no longer the heavy dragging anchor of guilt. It was the weight of responsibility, a load he knew how to carry. Where do you want the partition walls? Jade asked, tapping her screen. Keep the center open, Rowan instructed, pointing to the main floor. Sarah says the community needs a place to gather that isn't a hallway. Put the clinic rooms on the perimeter near the power junctions. And Jade? Yeah. Make sure the heating units are overrated by 20%, Rowan said softly. They get cold easily. Jade's smile softened. You got it, boss. The transformation of Bay 5 Alpha was a miracle of collective effort. It wasn't just the maintenance crew. As word spread that the veteran was building a safe haven, the Visari came. They didn't have credits to donate, but they had hands. They came with scavenged fabric to soften the hard metal walls. They came with paint made from crushed pigments to cover the rust. They scrubbed the floors until the deck plating shone. Sarah was there every day. She was still weak, her movements slow and careful, but her presence was the gravity that held the project together. She sat in a chair near the entrance, wrapped in her thick shawls, acting as the translator, the diplomat, and the spiritual anchor. No elder, Sarah said patiently to Thalen, who was inspecting a row of newly installed biobeds with suspicion. It is not a quarantine zone. Look at the doors. There are no locks on the outside. We can leave whenever we want. Elder Thalen huffed, tapping his staff on the floor. It smells like a hospital. It smells of human chemicals. It smells of safety, Sarah corrected him gently. Rowan ensured the air filtration is mixed with aromatic diffusers. He asked me what scent reminds us of home. Thalen paused, sniffing the air. Underneath the antiseptic, there was a faint note of cedar and spiced amber. He did that. He did, Sarah said. He listens, Elder. That is rare for his kind. Thalen looked across the room to where Rowan was currently upside down, hanging from a ceiling truss, welding a support bracket. Luma was standing below him, wearing a hard hat that was 3 sizes too big, holding his toolbox and shouting encouragement. Higher, veteran. The sparks look like fireflies, Luma squealed. Thalen's ears twitched. Perhaps, the old fox grumbled. He is not entirely terrible, for a human. Sarah watched Rowan descend from the truss, wiping sweat from his forehead. He grinned at Luma and dropped a chocolate ration bar into her hat. The look on his face, unguarded light, made Sarah's heart do a traitorous flutter in her chest. She had spent years building walls around herself fueled by the bitterness of the war and the struggle to survive. But this man with his sad eyes, and his graying hair, and his stubborn need to fix everything was dismantling her defenses, brick by brick. The official opening of the Ember Care Center was a quiet affair, but the tension was palpable because of the security detail. Chief Darius Cole had been assigned to oversee the safety of the new sector. It was a punishment from the council, a way to sideline him for the public relations disaster he had nearly caused. Cole took the assignment with stiff-lipped professionalism, but his displeasure was evident in the way he stood by the main airlock. His arms crossed, his uniform pristine and sharp enough to cut glass. He watched the Visari children running across the mats in the play area. He watched Dr. Solis administering treatments without a security override code. He watched Rowan Hale directing a team of volunteers to hang a banner that read Unity in 3 languages. Cole felt like a stranger in his own station. He had spent his career believing that order came from separation from categorization, from strict adherence to protocol. This place was messy. It was loud. It was emotional. And yet the station metrics showed that tension in the lower decks had dropped by 40% in the last week. Crime was down. Efficiency was up. "You look like you swallowed a lemon, mister." "Chief," a voice piped up from knee height. Cole looked down. It was the girl, the one with the mismatched eyes, Luma. She was holding a sheet of stickers, bright neon cartoons of animals and stars. "It is, Chief Cole," he corrected her automatically. "And I am observing." "Observing is boring," Luma stated. "You should participate. Mommy says participation builds character." Cole stiffened. "I am here to ensure security, citizens. Not to play." Luma scrutinized him. "You are very gray. Even your buttons are gray. You need color. Color makes people less scary." Before Cole could react, Luma reached out and slapped a sticker onto his thigh, right on the pristine fabric of his trousers. Cole flinched, as if he had been shot. He looked down. It was a sticker of a fat, smiling orange fox wearing sunglasses. "What do you think you are doing?" Cole sputtered, reaching to peel it off. "No," Luma commanded, grabbing his hand. "Leave it. It is a badge. It means you are part of the pack now. If you take it off, it means you hate puppies." Cole froze. He looked at the girl. He looked at the ridiculous sticker. He looked around the room and saw half a dozen Visari adults watching him, their breath held. Even Rowan Hale had stopped working and was watching from the scaffolding, a challenge in his eyes. If he peeled it off, he was the villain. If he left it, he was compromised. Cole slowly lowered his hand. He straightened his spine. "It is acceptable," Cole said stiffly, "as a temporary identification marker." Luma beamed a smile that could power a starship. "Good job, Chief Gray. Now come, I will show you the juice station. The orange juice is actually orange today." She grabbed his gloved hand and pulled. For a second, Cole resisted. Then, with a sigh that seemed to deflate his entire rigid posture, he let himself be led toward the refreshments. From the scaffolding, Rowan chuckled. "You are enjoying this too much," Sarah said, appearing beside the ladder. "I am enjoying seeing a man learn that he is not the center of the universe," Rowan replied, climbing down. He landed next to her, close enough to smell the spices in her fur. "He is trying," Sarah said. "In his own way." "We are all trying," Rowan said. He looked at her. She looked better today. The treatments were working. The glow in her fur was a healthy shimmer, not the blinding burn of the fever. "How do you feel?" "Like I might live," Sarah said softly. "It is a strange feeling. I had gotten used to the idea of ending." Rowan's face darkened. "Don't say that." "It is the truth," Sarah said. "Before you walked into my apartment with that bottle of wine, I was preparing Luma for the silence. Now, I have to prepare her for noise, for life." She nodded toward the corner of the room, where a section had been cordoned off with soft rugs and bookshelves. "We call it the Fox Corner. It is for stories." "Stories?" "Yes," Sarah said. "We want you to tell them." Rowan recoiled. "Me, I don't have good stories, Sarah." My stories end with explosions and evacuation orders. Not those stories, Sarah said, touching his arm. Tell them about how you fixed the light in the dome. Tell them about the time you stood in front of an armed guard and quoted a 20-year-old law. Tell them about the machines. Children need to know that things can be repaired. They need to know that broken does not mean garbage. Rowan looked at the fox corner. A group of kits, Vasari human, and even a young reptilian Talar were gathered on the rugs waiting. They won't listen to a boring mechanic, Rowan muttered. They will listen to the veteran, Sarah whispered. Go. It is an order, Colonel. Rowan went. He sat in the big armchair they had salvaged. He felt terrified, more terrified than he had been in the council chamber. But when he started talking, explaining how a hyperdrive engine worked by comparing it to a spinning top, the room went silent. The children listened. And as he spoke, Rowan realized that he wasn't just explaining mechanics. He was explaining hope. The days turned into weeks, and the Ember Care Center became the heartbeat of the sector. It wasn't just a clinic anymore. It was a school, a town hall, and a living room for anyone who felt out of place on the station. Rowan found himself spending more time there than in his own quarters. He kept his job in maintenance. He insisted on earning his keep, but every evening at 1700 hours, he clocked out and went to the center. One late night, after the lights had dimmed and the patients had settled into sleep, Rowan sat with Sarah on the observation deck of the center. It looked out over the Vixen Tier, now peaceful under the station's night cycle. They shared a thermos of tea. The silence between them was comfortable, worn soft by shared proximity. "Do you remember the ship?" Sarah asked suddenly. Rowan stiffened. They rarely spoke directly of the Aegis. "I try not to." "I remember your voice," Sarah said. She was looking out at the lights, her profile sharp against the shadows. Over the intercom, "You sounded so young. You kept saying, 'Move back. Make room. We are not leaving until the bay is full.' My father was angry. He said you were packing us like livestock. But my mother held me and said, 'Listen to him. He is breaking the rules for us.'" Rowan gripped his cup. "I overloaded the reactor shielding Sarah. That decision gave you the fever. It killed your mother 3 years later." "And it gave me 20 years of life." Sarah turned to him, her eyes fierce. "It gave me Luma. Do not dare apologize for my life, Rowan Hale." "I just wish I could have done it cleanly," Rowan whispered. "I wish I could have been the hero in the storybooks who saves everyone without a cost." "That is a fairy tale," Sarah said. "Real heroes have scars. Real heroes make trades. You traded your career and your conscience for our lives. That is a debt I can never repay, but I can stop you from hating yourself for it." She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers interlocked with his. Her skin was warm, a pleasant living heat. "Luma drew a picture today," Sarah said, changing the subject, her voice lighter. "Another soup picture?" Rowan asked, grateful for the shift. "No." Sarah pulled a folded piece of paper from her shawl. She handed it to him. Rowan unfolded it. It was done on proper drawing paper this time, supplied by the center. It showed the Star Garden dome. Under the artificial tree sat 3 figures. One was a large fox. One was a small fox. And one was a human with gray hair and a tool belt. Above them in big, bold, crooked letters was a single word: home. Rowan stared at the drawing. His vision blurred. "She calls you my human now," Sarah said softly. "She told the Talar boy that her human is the strongest, because he can lift a generator and he knows all the words in the dictionary." Rowan laughed a wet, choked sound. "I definitely don't know all the words." "You know the important ones," Sarah said. She leaned closer, her shoulder pressed against his. "Rowan, are you going to stay when the center is finished, when the politics settle down? Will you go back to being a ghost?" Rowan looked at the drawing. He looked at Sarah. He saw the fear behind her bravery. She was terrified that this was temporary, that he was just another relief worker who would pack up and leave when the crisis was managed. "I am not going anywhere," Rowan said. His voice was rough with emotion. "I spent 15 years running away from what I did. I am done running. Besides," he tapped the drawing, "I have been claimed. Luma put me in the picture. I don't think I am allowed to resign." Sarah let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for weeks. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Good. Because if you tried to leave, I would have to bite you. And I have very sharp teeth." Rowan rested his cheek against her soft, furred head. "I don't doubt it." The true test of the new reality came a week later. It was a minor incident, really. A group of transport pilots fresh off a long haul and drunk on cheap synthetic spirits tried to push their way into the Vixen tier. They were shouting slurs, looking for trouble, looking for someone to blame for their own miserable shifts. They ended up at the doors of the Ember Care Center. "Open up!" one of the pilots shouted, banging on the metal. "We heard this is where the station wastes its power, heating the cages for the animals." Rowan was inside reading to the children in the Fox corner. He stood up immediately, his face darkening. He motioned for Jade to take the kids to the back room. "Stay here," Rowan told Sarah. "Like hell," Sarah said, standing up beside him. She was trembling, but she grabbed a heavy metal walking stick. Rowan moved to the door, ready for a fight. He was older, yes, but he still knew how to throw a punch. He cycled the airlock open, stepping out into the corridor to confront the drunks. "Turn around," Rowan ordered, his voice low and dangerous. "Go back to your ship. You are not welcome here." "Look at this," the lead pilot sneered. He was a big man swaying on his feet. "The Fox lover. You think you are tough, old man? Why don't you get out of the way and let us see the zoo?" He shoved Rowan. Rowan didn't budge, but he balled his fists, preparing to strike. "That is enough," the voice cracked like a whip. Chief Darius Cole stepped out from the shadows of the security alcove. He was flanked by 2 guards, but he waved them back. He walked toward the pilots alone. "Chief Cole," the pilot stammered, recognizing the uniform. "We were just concerned citizens. This facility is a drain on—" "This facility," Cole interrupted, his voice icy, "is a protected diplomatic enclave operating under Article 9 of the Crescent Treaty. Disruption of its operations is a federal offense carrying a mandatory sentence of 6 months in the brig." The pilot blinked. "What? Since when do you care about the treaty?" "Since I read it," Cole said smoothly. He stepped between Rowan and the pilot. He didn't look at Rowan, but his stance was protective. "And since I decided that I do not like drunkards disturbing the peace in my sector." Cole leaned in close to the pilot. "Furthermore, the residents inside are under my personal protection. If you touch one hair on their heads or even look at them with disrespect, I will revoke your docking license permanently. Do I make myself clear?" The pilot paled. "Yes, sir. Clear, sir." "Leave," Cole commanded. The drunks scrambled away, tripping over themselves to get to the lift. Silence settled over the corridor. Rowan looked at Cole. He saw the sticker on Cole's leg, the orange fox with sunglasses still there, slightly peeling at the edges, but stubbornly attached. Article 9. Rowan asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I didn't think you memorized it." Cole smoothed his tunic. He looked uncomfortable. "It is a poorly written document, Hale. The syntax is archaic, but the logic holds up. Order requires stability. You cannot have stability if one part of the population is being terrorized." "Thank you, Darius," Rowan said genuinely. Cole grunted. "Don't get used to it. And tell the child to stop putting stickers on my datapad. I am running out of room." He turned and walked back to his post. But as he turned, Rowan saw a flicker of something on the chief's face. It wasn't quite a smile, but the lines around his mouth were less severe. He was thawing. Rowan went back inside. Sarah was waiting. She had seen everything on the monitors. "He defended us," Sarah said, sounding stunned. He defended the treaty, Rowan corrected. But for Cole, that is the same thing. He needs rules to be a good man. We just gave him better rules. That night, the fever came back to Sarah. It wasn't a crisis, just a reminder. She lay on the bed in her apartment, shivering slightly. Rowan sat beside her, wringing out a cool cloth. Luma was asleep in the bunk above, snoring softly. Rowan placed the cloth on Sarah's forehead. She sighed, leaning into his touch. "You should go home," Sarah whispered. "You have a shift in the morning." "I am home," Rowan said. He sat on the floor, resting his back against the bed frame. Sarah rolled onto her side to look at him. The glow of her fur cast soft, dancing shadows on his face. "Rowan," she said, "if this fever takes me eventually, you promise me something." "Sarah." "Promise me," she insisted. "You will not let Luma forget me, but you will also not let her become bitter. You will teach her that the world is broken, but it can be fixed." Rowan reached up and stroked her cheek. "I promise. But you are not going anywhere for a long time. I have a plan. Dr. Solis thinks that with the new power grid we can start a localized radiation scrubbing therapy. It might not cure you, but it will buy us years, decades." Sarah smiled. It was the smile through the fever, the one that had started it all. "You always have a plan, veteran." "It is my job," Rowan said. "I am in logistics." "If you ever disappear again," Sarah murmured, her eyes drifting shut as sleep claimed her. "If you ever run away, I will not forgive you." Rowan leaned forward and kissed her forehead. It was a chaste kiss, reverent and full of a promise that was heavier than any treaty. "This time," Rowan whispered into the quiet room, "you won't be able to get rid of me. I am part of the pack." He settled back against the bed, listening to the dual rhythms of Sarah and Luma breathing. Outside, the station hummed a massive, indifferent machine floating in the void. But here in this small room, filled with paper stars and fairy lights, Rowan Hale finally found the one thing he had been searching for across the galaxy. Peace. The war was over. The rebuilding had begun. And for the first time in 20 years, the man who fixed things realized that he had finally fixed himself. 7 years is a significant amount of time for a space station. In the vacuum of the void, metal does not age, but the people inside it do. Paint chips' filters clog, and generations shift. But for Crescent Harbor, 7 years was not just a passage of time. It was a metamorphosis. The artificial sun of the Stargarden Dome still set at 1900 hours, casting its simulated apricot glow over the plaza. The air still smelled of ozone and recycled oxygen, but now it also carried the scent of spiced tea, roasted nuts, and the sweet, earthy aroma of K-leaf smoke. The bench was still there. It was the same cold recycled alloy bench located near the observation deck, bolted to the floor with the same industrial rivets. However, it was no longer just a piece of public furniture. A small brass plaque had been affixed to the backrest. The engraving was simple, polished daily, by the hands of passers-by, until it shone like gold. Here sat a lonely veteran. Here stood a little fox. Here a dinner invitation changed the world. It was known locally as the Fox Bench. It had become a superstition among the station's residents that if you sat there when you were feeling lost, someone would eventually come along and offer you a direction. On this particular Tuesday evening, the bench was empty, waiting. Below the dome, the Vixen tier was unrecognizable from the cramped, shadowed ghetto it had once been. The blast doors that used to separate the sectors were permanently locked in the open position, decorated with garlands of dried flowers and fiber optic lights. The narrow corridors, once choked with the fear of deportation, were now a vibrant marketplace. Rowan Hale walked through the market, his gait a little slower than it had been 7 years ago. His hair had transitioned from pepper and salt to a distinguished steel gray, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, though they were no longer etched by sleeplessness. He wore a clean, navy blue tunic civilian wear, but he still carried a multi-tool on his belt. Old habits died hard. Evening veteran. A Vasari baker called out, tossing a warm bun toward him. Rowan caught it with practiced ease. Good throwing arm, Kale. You should sign up for the zero-gravity ball team. And leave my oven, who would feed the tourists. Kale laughed, his tail swishing happily. Rowan smiled a real smile that reached his eyes and continued walking. He was heading toward the Ember Care and Community Outreach Center, or, as everyone simply called it, the Hearth. The repurposed cargo bay had grown. It had swallowed the adjacent storage units and expanded into a sprawling complex of clinics, classrooms, and gathering halls. The walls were painted in warm ochres and teals covered in murals depicting the history of the Vasari migration and their settlement on Crescent Harbor. Rowan walked through the main doors and was immediately assaulted by noise. It was the good kind of noise, children laughing, the hum of learning projectors, and the clatter of dinner trays. "You are late," a voice called out from the reception desk. Rowan looked over. Luma Nix was no longer the tiny kit in an oversized t-shirt. She was 14 years old now, a lanky, graceful teenager, with limbs that seemed to grow an inch every week. Her fur had thickened into a lustrous coat of deep russet and cream, and her tail was a magnificent plume that she groomed with obsessive vanity. She stood behind the desk, tapping a stylus against her datapad. She wore the official vest of a center assistant, adorned with more pins and badges than a decorated general. "I got stopped by the baker," Rowan defended himself, taking a bite of the bun. "Diplomatic relations," Luma rolled her mismatched eyes, one amber, one electric blue. The blue eye still held that piercing, unsettling intelligence that cut right through his defenses. "You mean you got stopped for a snack? Mom is in the med wing. She is threatening to discharge herself again." "Is she?" Rowan sighed, swallowing the bread. "What is the excuse this time?" "She says the sheets are too scratchy and she misses her own teapot," Luma reported, not looking up from her screen. "Also, Dr. Solis is trying to make her eat green nutrient paste. You know how she gets about the paste." Rowan chuckled. "I will handle it. How is the story club preparation going?" Luma's ears perked up, betraying her teenage coolness. "It is good. We have 3 new kids today. A Talar hatchling, and 2 humans from the engineering deck. They want to hear about the Great Drift." "You are a good leader, Luma," Rowan said softly. Luma stopped tapping. She looked at him, her expression softening into something fond and fierce. "I had good teachers. Now go. Mom is grumpy. She needs her human." Rowan walked past the desk, reaching out to ruffle the fur between her ears. She swatted his hand away, pretending to be annoyed, but her tail gave a traitorous thump against the chair. He moved through the familiar halls of the center. He passed the Fox Corner, which was now a dedicated amphitheater with plush seating. He passed the wall of photos, hundreds of faces of patients who had been treated, stabilized, and integrated into the station's life. He found Sarah in private room 4. She was sitting on the edge of the biobed, fully dressed in her favorite shawl, glaring at a tray of green gelatinous food. 7 years had been kind to her spirit, but the ember fever had taken its toll on her body. She was thinner now, fragile in a way that terrified Rowan every time he held her. The glow beneath her fur was a constant, low-level hum, managed by the advanced radiation scrubbers Rowan and Dr. Solis had installed, but never fully extinguished. "If you tell me to eat this," Sarah said without looking up, "I will bite you." Rowan closed the door and leaned against it. "I was going to suggest we order takeout from the noodle stand on Deck 6. Sarah looked up. Her amber eyes lit up. "You are an enabler, Rowan Hale. That is why I keep you around." "I thought it was for my rugged good looks," Rowan joked, walking over to sit beside her. "That too," she admitted, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Though the gray hair makes you look like a stern professor." "I am a stern professor," Rowan said, wrapping an arm around her waist. I taught a class on atmospheric thermodynamics this morning. 3 students fell asleep. Sarah laughed, the sound raspy but warm. Take me home, Rowan. I hate this room. It smells of antiseptic and pity. Mira just wants to monitor your white blood cell count, Rowan said gently. The flare-up last week was intense. I am fine, Sarah insisted, though her hand trembled slightly as she gripped his sleeve. I am always fine when I am with you. They left the clinic 20 minutes later, after Rowan successfully negotiated her release with a very exasperated Dr. Mira Solis. As they walked out of the center, they ran into a figure patrolling the perimeter. It was Chief Darius Cole. Cole had aged too. His hair was stark, white-cut, in the same military buzz he had worn for decades. He moved a little stiffer, favoring his left knee, but his uniform was still immaculate. Colonel, Cole nodded stiffly. Madam Sarah. Chief, Rowan returned the nod. Quiet night. Too quiet, Cole grumbled. The teenagers are painting murals on the ventilation ducts in Sector 9. I told them it was vandalism. They told me it is a cultural expression. I am debating whether to arrest them or give them better brushes. Give them the brushes, Darius, Sarah said, smiling. It saves you the paperwork of processing them, Cole sighed, the sound of a man who had long ago surrendered to the chaotic tide of the Vasari presence. You are likely right. Oh, and hail your daughter. Luma, Rowan corrected automatically. Luma, Cole conceded. She reprogrammed the security drones in the atrium to play music for 1,800 hours. Jazz. Please tell her that if she hacks my drones again, I will be very displeased. I will speak to her, Rowan promised, suppressing a grin. He knew Cole secretly loved jazz. He had seen the old security chief tapping his foot yesterday. Good evening, Cole grunted, continuing his patrol. As he walked away, a small, bright orange sticker was visible on the back of his utility belt. It was a cartoon fox. He had never taken it off. Rowan and Sarah walked slowly back to the Vixen tier. They didn't go straight to the apartment. Instead, they took the lift up to the Star Garden Dome. The plaza was quieter now. The rush hour was over. The artificial stars were bright in the ceiling grid. They walked to the Fox bench. It was empty. Rowan sat down, groaning slightly as his back settled against the metal. Sarah sat beside him, pulling her shawl tighter. She rested her head on his shoulder, and he draped his arm around her, pulling her into his warmth. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the station rotate, the view of the stars shifting slowly through the glass. It has been 7 years, Sarah whispered. 7 years since you bribed me with root vegetable soup, Rowan murmured, kissing the top of her head. Rowan, Sarah said, her voice changing tone. It became serious, weighted with a gravity that made Rowan shift to look at her. What is it? Are you in pain? No, Sarah said. She pulled away slightly, so she could look him in the eyes. Her gaze was intense, searching. There is something I have never told you, a story I have kept in a box. Rowan felt a cold prickle of apprehension. What story? Sarah took a deep breath. The glow in her fur pulsed rhythmically. You think I invited you that day because Luma found you. You think it was a coincidence that the lonely veteran met the sick refugee. Wasn't it? Rowan asked. No, Sarah said. I knew who you were, Rowan. I knew your name before I ever saw you on the station. I knew your name 27 years ago. Rowan froze. 27 years ago, that was the evacuation. The Aegis. Yes, Sarah said. I was 10 years old. I was on the loading dock of the moon colony. My parents were holding my hands. The sirens were screaming. The ships were full. The loading ramps were closing. Rowan stopped breathing. He was back there. He could hear the screams. He could smell the burning ozone of the orbital bombardment. We were going to be left behind, Sarah continued, her voice steady but tearful. The automated system had locked the doors. We were standing in the red zone. And then the announcement came over the loudspeakers. A voice. A young, terrified officer's voice. Rowan closed his eyes. Override Command 7 Alpha. Open the doors. Let them in. You said pack them in. Nobody stays on the ground, Sarah quoted him. She remembered the words perfectly. I saw the doors open. I felt the rush of the crowd. My father carried me on board. We were crushed against the bulkheads. There was no air. It was hot. The shielding, Rowan whispered, his voice cracking. I turned off the auxiliary shielding to divert power to the life support, to handle the extra mass. Yes, Sarah said. And because the shielding was down when we made the jump, the radiation leaked. That is when the fever started. For me. For my mother. For thousands of us. Rowan pulled his hand away from hers. He stood up, stumbling slightly, as if the gravity had suddenly shifted. He walked to the railing, gripping it with white knuckles. The secret he had carried, the guilt that had defined his entire existence, was not a secret at all. She knew. She had always known. You knew, Rowan choked out. You knew I did this to you. I gave you the fever. I killed your mother. You saved my life, Sarah said fiercely. Rowan turned around. I condemned you to a half-life of pain. I made you sick. How can you look at me? How could you let me into your home? How could you let me love Luma? Because, Sarah stood up, walking toward him, with slow, deliberate steps. I am an adult, Rowan. I understand the math. If you had not opened those doors, I would be dust on a dead moon. My atoms would be scattered across the crater. She reached him and placed her hands on his chest right over his heart. I was angry, Sarah admitted. For a long time. When my mother died, I cursed the officer who overloaded the ship. I hated you. I imagined you were some cold, heartless monster who viewed us as cargo. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears. But then I saw you on the bench. I saw a man who was broken. I saw a man who fixed a flickering light because he could not fix the past. And I realized you were not a monster. You were just a boy who had to make a choice that no one should ever have to make. It was the wrong choice, Rowan whispered. It was the only choice, Sarah corrected. You traded our health for our existence. It was a terrible trade, but it gave me a chance. It gave me years, and most importantly, it gave me Luma. She gripped his shirt. If I had died on that moon, Luma would never have been born. If I had not gotten sick, I would never have come to Crescent Harbor. I would never have met you. We would not be here. Rowan looked at her. He felt like his chest was being ripped open, but the pain wasn't destructive. It was the pain of a wound finally being cleaned out. I blamed myself for so long, Rowan said. I thought I was the villain of your story. You are not the villain, Sarah said firmly. You are the wreckage, and I am the wreckage, and together we built a raft. She reached up and touched his face. I forgave you the moment you walked through my door with that ridiculous bottle of wine. I wanted to see if you could forgive yourself. I wanted to see if you were brave enough to live with the consequences of your mercy. Rowan fell to his knees. He wrapped his arms around her waist, burying his face in the soft fur of her stomach. He wept. He wept for the boy he had been, for the lives he couldn't save, and for the incredible, impossible grace of the woman standing before him. Sarah stroked his hair, humming a soft Vasari lullaby. It is okay, she whispered. It is okay to be the one who survived Rowan. From the shadows of the large artificial fern behind the bench, a twig snapped. Rowan froze. He wiped his face quickly and looked up. Sarah turned. Luma stepped out from the foliage. She was still wearing her assistant vest, her arms crossed over her chest. She had been listening. Rowan stood up, panic flaring in his chest. Luma, how much did you hear? Enough, Luma said. Her voice was unreadable. She walked toward them, her tail twitching. She stopped in front of Rowan. She looked up at him, her mismatched eyes wide. "So," Luma said, "you are the reason Mom glows." Rowan flinched. "Yes, I am." "And you are the reason she is alive." "Yes." Luma tapped her chin, looking at the ceiling of the dome, as if calculating a complex equation. "Well," she said, dropping her gaze back to him, "that is a complicated transaction. But I have analyzed the data." She stepped forward and poked Rowan hard in the stomach. "If you had not made the ship go over capacity, Mom would be dead. If Mom was dead, I would not be here. If I was not here, who would organize the files at the center? Who would put stickers on Chief Cole? Who would make sure you eat vegetables?" She shook her head. "It seems that your bad decision resulted in my existence. Therefore, as the primary beneficiary of said existence, I rule that you are pardoned." Rowan blinked, stunned by the sheer pragmatic audacity of her logic. "Pardoned? Yes," Luma said. "However, there is a fine. You have to stop moping about it. It is annoying. And next time you fix something, try to fix the way you blame yourself for everything. It is a glitch in your software." Sarah burst out laughing. It was a bright, clear sound that echoed in the dome. Rowan looked at the teenager, this bridge between two worlds, this child of war and sickness, who had grown into a creature of pure light and logic. "I will try to patch the software," Rowan said, his voice trembling with a mixture of laughter and tears. Luma sighed dramatically. "Good. Now come on, I am hungry. And since you two were busy having a dramatic revelation on a bench, nobody made dinner. I vote for pizza." She grabbed Rowan's hand with one of hers, and Sarah's hand with the other. She pulled them together, linking the three of them into a chain. "Pizza sounds good," Sarah agreed, squeezing Rowan's hand. "Pizza it is," Rowan said. They walked away from the bench, leaving the empty seat behind. They walked toward the lift, a strange, mismatched family, a human veteran, a sick foxwoman, and a hybrid child walking into the future they had built out of the ashes of the past. The story of the Fox Bench did not end with them. In the weeks and months that followed, the story spread. It traveled through the ventilation ducts, passed between ships at the docking bays, and whispered in the queues at the mess hall. We see a montage of moments, fleeting but powerful. A young human mechanic fresh from the academy, and feeling overwhelmed by the vastness of the station, sits on the Fox Bench, with his head in his hands. A Visari elder walking by stops. He reads the plaque. He sits down. He offers the boy a piece of fruit. They do not speak the same language fluently, but they share the silence. Later, a Talar mother sits there weeping, because her child has been denied a school placement. A human teacher, one of Luma's volunteers, sits beside her. She reads the plaque. She introduces herself. By the time they stand up, the child has a tutor. The bench becomes a beacon. It becomes a challenge. In the Vixen tier, the Ember Care Center continues to thrive. We see Chief Cole, sitting in the Fox corner, reading a storybook to a group of hushed children. He is reading with surprising dramatic flair, doing voices for the characters. Luma watches from the doorway, smirking, snapping a photo that will definitely end up on the station's internal network. We see Rowan and Sarah in their apartment. It is late. Sarah is coughing, the fever flaring up again. Rowan is there holding her cool clothes ready. It is not a fairy tale ending. The sickness is still there. The pain is still there. But the fear is gone. They face it together, illuminated by the soft glow of the fairy lights, and the love that has survived the darkness. We see Luma standing on a podium in the main plaza of Crescent Harbor. She is older now, perhaps 20. She is addressing a crowd of hundreds humans, Visari Talar, and species from the Outer Rim. She is speaking about the bridge generation, the children who refuse to inherit the hatred of their parents. Behind her, Rowan and Sarah stand gray and frail but beaming with a pride that outshines the artificial sun. And finally, the camera pulls back. It pulls back from the plaza, up through the glass of the Star Garden dome. It rises above the station, looking down at the metal city, floating in the void. It is a speck of light in the infinite darkness of space. But inside that speck, there is warmth. The view returns to the bench one last time. It is sunset again, 1900 hours. The apricot light washes over the metal. The bench is empty, but it is not lonely. It is waiting. A small, folded piece of paper has been left on the seat, weighed down by a pebble. It is a drawing, a crude crayon drawing of a bowl of soup and a stick figure smiling. Beneath the drawing, scrawled in a child's hand, are the words, "If you are sad, come to apartment 4B. We have extra spoons." The universe is vast and cold and full of terrible decisions. But as long as there is a bench and a bowl of soup and the courage to invite a stranger into your life, no one has to be lost in the dark. The little fox had been right all along. The veteran didn't need to fix the world. He just needed to fix the empty seat beside him. The end.